Welcome to Class with Miss E, all the way from my home to you in the comfort of your homes. Grade 11s and 12s, before I start this, I just want to let you know that I am praying for you and that I hope you are safe and well. Now, the WhatsApp groups that I will be starting will have you all listed. If I don't have your number, it will have one of your parents on the WhatsApp group. And it is for you to communicate with me, ask me any questions. In addition, I will be sending out work that I want you to do. So how this is going to work is every week I am going to load slides for you to watch on YouTube, and then you can do the sources and the activities I ask you to do, and ask me any questions if you don't understand anything. Now, since we have just written our tests, I wanted to take a look at source-based questions. I just want to remind you all that when the exams come around, you have 3 hours in order to answer 3 questions. And I have asked you explicitly over and over to do 1 source-based and 2 essay questions. Now, if you do the source-based questions like I ask you to do, you will have enough time to write your 2 essays. So, without further ado, let's get to how do you tackle the source-based questions in an exam. The first thing I want to do is I want to give you just 3 quick hints on how you need to answer your source-based questions. The first thing is, so many of you waste your reading time. You lie on your arms or you look into space, and that's 10 minutes that you've lost where you could have gone and read the sources to see if you could find some of the easier level 1 question answers. Okay, so please don't waste your reading time. Use it. Read your sources, look at the questions, see if some of the sources don't already explicitly give you the answer. Then, you need to look at all the mark allocations that is given to you. So, if the question says that there is 2 times 2 equals 4 marks, that means that you need 2 facts in order to answer your question. This leads me to my third hint. Use bullet points to answer each of the questions. This way you don't waste time writing entire paragraphs just for a simple 1 mark question. You make a bullet point, you know that it's a 1 mark, 1 times 1 question, therefore you only have the 1 bullet point, you quickly write the answer. Don't write a paragraph for a 1 mark question. If it's a 2 times 2 question, make sure that you answer the question completely. 2 bullet points with 2 facts. Clear? Cool. Now, in order for me to be able to explain to you how to answer questions, I need to give you some examples. Now, grade 12s, I know that the test I'm going to go through is a grade 11 past paper about the Great Depression. However, the questioning techniques are the same, the levels are the same, and you need to understand how to answer specific questions, so I need you to listen very, very carefully to this. Let us start. Right, so at the top is the source, at the bottom is the questions. Let's quickly go through our source 1A. The Great Depression in the United States began on October 29, 1929, a day known forever as Black Tuesday, when the American stock market, which had been roaring steadily upwards for almost a decade, crashed, plunging the country into its most severe economic downturn yet. Speculators lost their shares, banks failed, The nation's money supply diminished, and companies went bankrupt and began to fire their workers in droves. Meanwhile, President Herbert Hoover urged patience and self-reliance. He thought the crisis was just a passing incident in our national lives, that it wasn't the federal government's job to try and resolve. By 1932, one of the blackest years of the Great Depression, at least 1/4 of American workforce was unemployed. When President Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933, he acted swiftly to try and stabilize the economy and provide jobs and relief to those who were suffering. Over the next 8 years, the government instituted a series of experimental projects and programs, known collectively as the New Deal, which aimed to restore some measures of dignity and prosperity to many Americans. More than that, Roosevelt's New Deal permanently changed the federal government's relationship with the U.S. populace. So, question 1 says, what, according to the source, happened to the American stock market? We look over and we see that the question is only asking for one fact. Therefore, we will only have one bullet. When we read the source again, we see that the American stock market, which had been roaring steadily upwards for almost, that doesn't answer our question, but the next part does. It crashed. Therefore, our answer is, it crashed. Question 1.2 asks you to mention 2 effects of the stock market crash in 1929. And when we look at our mark allocation, we see that it wants 2 facts, so 2 bullet points. And once again, the source has multiple options for you to choose from. It tells you that speculators lost their shares, banks failed, the nation's money supply diminished, companies went bankrupt. You pick from any of those. You pick 2, just 2. Speculators lost their shares, banks failed. Question 1.1.3. Comment on the impact of the Great Depression that the Great Depression had on ordinary citizens in America. Now, this question, you won't find the answer directly in the source because it asks you to use your own knowledge. I want you to notice that question 1 and 2 told you that the answer was in the source. It says, according to the source, or mention any 2. That tells you that the answer is in the source. But question 1.1.3 asks you to comment on the impact of the Great Depression. And therefore, the source isn't going to directly give you the answer. This is your own knowledge. And you should immediately know that people lost their jobs, they lost their homes, they lost their savings, they ended up homeless and living in Hoovervilles. They had to rely on soup kitchens and charity in order to just have a meal. Many of them had to sell whatever they had in order to be able to go and buy food for their families. So this is an own knowledge question that asks you to give 2 impacts of the Great Depression on ordinary people. Please, guys, not on business, not on the economy, on people. Therefore, your answer is going to be, they lost their jobs, they lost their savings. Simple. Right. The next 2 questions are also on source 1A, and 1.1.4 asks how, according to the source, did Roosevelt deal with the Great Depression? And it is a 1-mark answer. You are not going to write a whole paragraph for this. The answer is in the source, and it's quite simply, he started or created the New Deal. Then question 1.5 asks you, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, explain why a historian will consider the source useful when researching the role played by the American presidents. Now, the source here speaks about Herbert Hoover, and here speaks about Franklin Roosevelt. And therefore, you can say that this source is useful, not only because it speaks about these two presidents, but also because it explains what happened to the stock market. And it shows how Herbert Hoover didn't believe that the government should interfere in the economy, and how when Roosevelt created the New Deal, he spent government money to boost the economy. That spent government money to boost the economy, that is your own knowledge. You need to have something in there that is your own knowledge in order to answer this question. Right, so now we're on to source B, and I hope you guys are still with me. Now, source B states that despite assurances from President Herbert Hoover and other leaders that the crisis would run its course, matters continued to get worse over the following 3 years. By 1930, 4 million Americans looking for work could not find it. That number had risen to 6 million in 1931. Meanwhile, the country's industrial production had dropped by half. Breadlines, soup kitchens, and rising number of homeless people became more and more common in America's towns and cities. Farmers couldn't afford to harvest their crops and were forced to leave them rotting in the fields, while people elsewhere starved. In the fall of 1930, the first 4 waves of banking panics began, as large numbers of investors lost confidence in the solvency, the ability to remain in business, of their banks and demanded their deposits in cash, forcing banks to liquidate, recall loans to supplement their insufficient cash reserves on hand. Bank runs swept the United States again in the spring and fall of 1931 and the fall of 1932, and by early 1933 thousands of banks had closed their doors. In the face of this dire situation, Hoover's administration tried supporting failing banks and other institutions with government loans. The idea was that the banks would in turn loan to businesses, which would be able to hire back their employees. So, question 1.2 says, define the term Great Depression in the context of the economic developments in the USA. It is a one fact question, 1 times 2, 1 fact. But I want you to understand that this question is not asking you to draw the definition from the source. It is a own knowledge question. And you need to say that it is an economic downturn of America's economy in 1929. You need to in some way say that the economy was failing. Okay. So the answer I have here is simply a period of economic downturn after the 1929 stock exchange crash known as Black Tuesday. Question 1.2.2. What, according to the source, was the impact of the Great Depression in the USA? Please note that it asks you according to the source. That means this is not asking you to use your own knowledge. It is asking you to directly look at the source and find the answer. And it wants two facts. Therefore, we go and we look at our source and we see 4 million Americans were looking for work and could not find it. The industrial production had dropped by half. Bread lines, soup kitchens. There was a rising number of homeless people. Okay, so there's multiple examples in this source. You just give to? And that answer that I have written down here, people were unemployed, production had dropped a half. Then, comment on the role that Hoover played trying to save the American economy during 1929 Great Depression. The question, when we look at the mark allocation, asks for 2 facts. So you need to have 2 comments. And I want you to notice that, once again, this is a own knowledge question. There is parts where you can draw from the source, because the source does give you a little hint. If you look towards the bottom of the source, it says that Hoover's administration tried supporting failing banks. And that is an action that Hoover took to try and save the economy in the 1929 Great Depression. However, from your own knowledge, you should know that he also believed that the government should not be involved in the economy, that they believed in this laissez-faire or rugged individualism ideals. Therefore, your answer needs to state that Hoover believed that the government should not interfere in the economy. However, he did offer loans to banks in an attempt to boost the economy. Simple. Then question 1.2.4 asks, use the source and your own knowledge. Once again, it's asking you to use both the source and your own knowledge to explain whether Hoover was successful in ending the Great Depression in America in the 1930s. Now, your own knowledge should immediately scream at you, no, he wasn't successful, because by 1933, the Great Depression was still going on, and it was Franklin Roosevelt coming into power and offering the people the New Deal, which spent government money, that allowed the economy to start to improve. Therefore, your answer needs to say that Hoover was not successful. He started loaning banks money too late, and too many people had been affected already. And after he loaned banks this money, things still got worse for the American people. Okay, let's continue. Source 1C is a picture. We see a group of men standing in a line by a door, and over the door it says free soup, coffee and donuts for the unemployed. Question 1 asks, why do you think the photograph was taken? The answer is quite simple, but I want you to notice it's asking for 2 facts. So you could say that it was to show the extent of unemployment crisis, or to show that Roosevelt's administration was supporting Americans through this crisis. It's your own opinion. I want you to notice that this is own knowledge. Then, question 3.2 asks you, what was the name of the program that was used to help the unemployed citizens? And once again, own knowledge. Nowhere in this whole test did they drop the name of this program. Okay, and I want you to remember back, grade 11s, I drew you a beautiful umbrella on your board, and I had you copy them into your notebooks. And there were 3 programs that Roosevelt dealt with. And the one that Soup Kitchens was under was the Relief Act. Right. Then, question 4 asks you to study source 1B and 1C and explain how these sources support each other regarding the effects of the Great Depression. So, if you remember, question 1B spoke about how people were homeless, how there were soup kitchens, and here we see people who are unemployed. So what we can say is that both sources show that people were unemployed, and both show or speak about soup kitchens. 2 marks, 2 facts for 2 marks each, 4 marks in the bag. Easy peasy. Then the last thing I really need to speak to you about is simply how to answer the paragraph questions. I have gone through these over and over and over again, but I just want to reiterate 3 things. In order to answer this question, you need to read all the sources again. Then you need to look at your question and find the main instruction, the main thing that this question is asking you to look at. For example, if you had the question, use the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge to write a paragraph of about 8 lines, 80 words, explaining the impact of the Great Depression. Oh, that's what they want me to do. They want me to explain the impact of the Great Depression. So that is what you're going to do. You're going to explain how people were affected by the Great Depression, how businesses were affected, what happened to the economy, what happened to people, they were losing their jobs, etc. However, you need to make sure that you acknowledge which sources you used. Source 1A shows, source 1B shows, source 1C indicates, whatever it might be. But you need to do that. You will lose your marks if you do not acknowledge your sources. Right, that brings us to the end of this lovely video. I hope that this has explained and broken down the questions and the way things are answered for you, that you can now see how you need to tackle these questions. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to contact me on WhatsApp. You have my number. Stay safe, grade 11s and 12s. I can't wait to see you face to face again.